Today we're going to do some applications of systems. There's really just one thing that we want to do, and that is take the methods for solving systems that we've done so far, and we're going to use them to solve applied problems with more than one unknown. And we're going to keep it to two variables just because of the time constraints we have in this class. Let's jump right in. First one, football, or an example from football. We're going to make a couple of assumptions here. We're going to assume that a touchdown is automatically worth 7 points and not 6 plus the extra point. But here's the scenario. Football team scores 6 possessions one sunny Sunday afternoon, and they score 34 points. The question is how many field goals at 3 points apiece and how many touchdowns at 7 points apiece were scored. Now you can figure this out by running the combinations through your head. But what we want to do is we want to write a system. Now you always need to, when you're writing a system for a word problem, you always need to ask yourself what two things or what two pieces of information are we given? Because those two things, those two main facts are what give you two equations, one equation for each fact. So, the first thing, a football scores on 6 possessions. That's one fact. And what's the other fact we're given? Total number of points, that's the other fact. So we're going to have one equation. One equation is just going to involve the number of possessions. And the other fact that we're going to have, the other equation, is the total number of points. Once you've decided that, the next thing you need to do is decide what two things are you actually trying to find, and you need to give those two things variables. And don't always just rely on x and y. That's not exciting. You want to choose variables that sort of will make sense in your head and keep track of what you're doing. Well, what two things are we trying to find here? The number of touchdowns and number of field goals. So let's call that F and T. F will be the number of field goals. And T will be the number of touchdowns. Okay, so based on F and T, we're going to go and now write our two equations based on those two facts. So we know that there are how many possessions? 6. So what's the equation that we've got there? You're thinking of the number of points. T plus F is 6. The number of field goals that we scored plus the number of touchdowns. We're not paying any attention to how many points they're worth, just the pure number of possessions. However many field goals we scored plus the number of touchdowns we scored has got to be 6 because we scored on 6 possessions. There was no safeties in this game. Now the total points. Now we're going to write an equation that tells us the total number of points. Well, how many points do you get for each touchdown? 7. So we know that 7 points for each touchdown, 7 times the number of touchdowns plus 3 times the number of field goals is going to equal 34. There's your system. Now we have to solve that. And at this point, and what we're going to do today, anytime we've got our system, we're going to work through the solution very quickly just to save some time. But choose a method. We don't have to rely on any one method. Look at it and decide which one's going to be the easiest. Would you most likely use elimination, substitution, or Cramer's rule on this? Substitution is going to be very slick because this is so easily solved for F or T. Okay, so let's use substitution. Let's solve this for F, and we get F equals 6 minus T. Plug that back in here, and we have 7T plus 3 times F, but we know F to be 6 minus T. That's equal to 34. Now we can solve that. 7T plus 18 minus 3T equals 34. T minus 3T is 4T equals 34 minus 18, 6t. And we can conclude that t is equal to 4. So we scored 4 touchdowns and apparently then 2 field goals. Now, that's definitely 6 possessions. Do the points work out? Sure it does. 4 times 7 is 28, plus 2 times 3 is 34 points. We're done. Okay? We're going to take $5,000. We're going to take $5,000 and we're going to put it into one of 2 different accounts. We can either put it in stocks, which would be 8.3% interest, or bonds at 4.2% interest. And the question is, how do we want to split up that $5,000 so that we end up with an overall yield of 6%? That's the question that we want to answer. Okay, so ask yourself, what are the 2 facts that you're given? Those are going to determine what your 2 equations are about. What 2 facts are you really given? You have $5,000. There's one fact. So we're going to write one equation involving the amount of principal. The amount of the principal, and that is $5,000. So we're going to have one equation involving that. What's the other equation involve? The 6%, the interest. Right, we want to have the amount of interest work out. So there's our 2 equations. One's going to involve the total amount of money, one's going to involve the interest. The next thing we want to do is we need to give our variables some labels. Well, this one should jump out at you. What should our 2 variables be? B and S. B and S. Bonds and stocks. Better yet, S and B. Okay, so what do the amount of stocks and the amount of bonds have to do with the total amount of money that's invested? They have to add together to be $5,000. Okay, the amount of stocks, amount in stocks plus the amount in bonds has to be $5,000. There's one equation. Now we have to write one that involves just the interest. Just the interest. The amount of interest has to work out too. Just to save a little room, I'm going to write this up a little higher. So now just the interest. Now let's take just the amount of interest off of the stocks. How much interest are we going to get off of the amount of money that we put into stocks? The total is going to be 6% of that $5,000. We're going to need that, but let's first figure out how much money would we, what's our interest rate on the stocks? 8.3%. How much do we put into stocks? 8.3 times S. Excuse me, 0.083 because it's 8.3%. So the amount of interest just off the stocks is 0.083 S. Whoops, that's a funny looking S. 0.83 S. That's the amount of interest from stocks. Well, that's not the only place we're getting interest, of course. The other place we're getting interest is from bonds. 0.042. See, there's a new James Bond movie out now? Yeah, it's not right. 0.042B, that's our interest from bonds. And now what's our total interest got to be off of that? It's got to be 6% of 5,000, 0.06 times 5,000. There's our second equation. Now we just need to solve that. What is it about these problems that makes substitution so nice? There's one real simple equation. Anytime you've got one of the equations that's really clean and easy, substitution works out well. So let's do that. Let's make a note here that, what do you want to solve for? Doesn't matter. Good answer. So let's say S equals minus B, 5,000 minus B. We could have said B equals 5,000 minus S. It'd be fine. So let's make our substitution here. Into this equation, this is going to become 0.083 times S, which is 5,000 minus B, plus 0.042B equals 0.06 times 5,000 is 300. This becomes 415 minus You solve that whole mess, you get $2,804.88 in bonds. The rest of the $5,000 has to be in stocks, and so the amount in stocks has got to be $2,195.12. Get a chance to be a little artistic here. We want to take a little 5% acid solution and we're going to take a little 12% acid solution. We want to dump those two together so that we end up with 4 gallons of 10%, thank you, 10% solution. That's the goal. Here's a case where being able to sketch out what you're doing might make it easier to think about what your equations are going to have to be. Okay, so go through the drill. What are the two things, what are the two real facts that we're given here? We have 4 gallons. There's one fact. The total volume of our liquid. So one equation involves our total volume. What's the other equation going to have to involve? The percentages, right. It's ultimately just the amount of acid. Does this problem look kind of familiar? It's pretty much exactly the same as the last problem, except instead of dollars, it's liquid, and instead of interest, it's acid. Other than that, it's the exact same thing. Instead of taking some percentage of our money, we're taking some percentage of the total. Instead of creating interest, we're measuring the amount of acid. Well, let's give our two things variables here. We've got some unknown amount to this 5%. Let's call it F. Good. F for 5%. And following that theme, let's call this one Q. T. All right, good. T. So for the total volume, what has to be true? F plus T is 4. F plus T is 4. The other fact that has to be true, how much acid there is in here plus the amount of acid in here has to equal the amount of acid in here. .05 F. 5% of F is acid. The rest of it presumably is water. Plus, over here we've got a little bit more, 12% of however much T we have equals, and down here we've got 10% of 4 gallons. And there's our system. We don't need the picture anymore once we get to that point. Okay. Well, from here it becomes pretty old news. Do our substitution. Let's just shoot through this real quickly. Noting the top equation, we can solve that for whatever we want. Let's solve it for F. F is equal to 4 minus T. And we end up with solve that. We can now get T isolated. Paying a little respect to SIGDIGs here, all the information that was given to us had 3, so a reasonable place to round off our solution is at 3. And so T turns out to be about 2.86 gallons, which leaves, that means we're going to have 2.86 gallons of 12%. And that leaves us with 4 minus 2.86, 1.14 gallons of 5%. And we're done.